The fact that both are young and constantly struggling with difficulties in their personal lives makes them seem quite similar at first glance. But when you dig into the details, you realize these similarities are only surface level and that we are actually dealing with two very different characters underneath. Peter lost his parents at a young age, grew up with his aunt, and lived in constant financial hardship. He started working at an early age just to get by, took on major responsibilities while still young, and began his struggle far earlier than most. Mark, on the other hand, had a happy childhood living with both his parents. His father was both a superhero and a popular writer. It's hard to say Mark faced any serious hardship during his childhood. He was financially comfortable. He didn't even need to work. Even though he chose to work anyway, his father provided him with a life comfortable enough to tell him he didn't have to. So while Peter was fighting just to hold on, Mark's life was already built on solid ground. The traumas these two characters experienced at the start of their superhero journeys are also very different. When Peter lost Uncle Ben, he knew he was an innocent and pure man. He had lost someone innocent, someone he loved, trusted, and who raised him. That immense grief led Peter to set a very clear direction for himself, swearing that no one else should have to go through the same thing. While life was already throwing constant obstacles at him, that trauma gave him a defined path to follow. Uncle Ben's death and the famous words, "With great power comes great responsibility," formed the unshakable foundation of Spider-Man's identity. Mark's trauma, however, is far more complicated. While living a beautiful and happy life, his entire world is suddenly turned upside down. He watches his father, the man he trusted, admired, and even considered perfect, suddenly slaughter innocents and destroy heroes. This isn't just a physical loss, it means the collapse of everything Mark ever believed in, every value he held. In the wake of such trauma, drawing a clear path like Peter did is not easy, because what Mark experienced wasn't just losing someone, it was the complete collapse of his entire reality. So even the moments that launched these two characters into heroism are completely different from each other, and that sets them apart from the very beginning. Spider-Man is largely a hero who fights within his own city, a neighborhood hero in a sense. The enemies he faces are mostly connected in some way to the people in his personal life. Dr. Octopus was his teacher, Lizard similarly, and Venom, Eddie Brock, was his colleague. The Green Goblin is his best friend's father, so nearly all of his enemies come from within his personal circle. Invincible's enemies, on the other hand, operate on a far larger scale. Apart from his father, he mostly fights characters he has never met before, threats that span entire galaxies. His battles concern not just a city, but the entire world and even the universe. This transforms him less into an individual hero and more into a cosmic figure. Although both of them try to hold themselves back during fights, that doesn't mean they fight in the same way. The most defining trait in Spider-Man's fights is his use of intelligence. He does use his strength, yes, but he mostly thinks strategically against his opponents, trying to find their weaknesses. Mark, on the other hand, mostly relies entirely on his raw power. He pushes himself to the limit when the situation calls for it, but you can't really say he approaches problems strategically. Here, another key difference emerges, and that is intelligence. Generally speaking, Peter is the smartest person in the room. Mark is the strongest. That pretty clearly defines the balance between the two. And honestly, it shows. When we say Spider-Man, the image that immediately comes to mind is that classic, clean-cut, likable Peter. But when we say invincible, the image that comes to mind is a Mark who is covered in blood, completely beaten up, and probably got punched around just 2 minutes ago. Trauma also shapes the moral values of these two characters. Peter is a hero who has clearly adopted a no-killing principle. Even when under the influence of the symbiote, he quickly recognizes his mistakes, pulls himself together, and returns to his own line. Mark doesn't have such a clear line. His symbiote isn't an external parasite, it's the confusion within himself. The things he heard from his father's values, and everything he believed in caused Mark to question what is right and what is wrong. He doesn't want to kill either, but he doesn't yet have a clear view on what the right thing to do actually is. That's why he has no defined line to return to. Peter had people in his life who could guide him and mentor him, and he needed them. Mark also had those people around him, but his life was so comfortable that he never even realized when he needed those values. And that's where one of the biggest differences reveals itself. Spider-Man was raised to be a hero. Invincible is someone who had to learn how to be a hero later on. It's also worth remembering this. Peter's journey of becoming a hero and his transformation into a classic superhero is something that is firmly established in all of our minds. His character feels like a completed whole, shaped by the tragedies he lived through, the lessons he learned, and the values that solidified over the years. But the same cannot be said for Mark. His story is only just beginning. He's a young man who has only just stepped into heroism, still searching for who he is and what kind of person he wants to be. That's why directly comparing Mark to Spider-Man might be a bit premature right now, because Peter is already a character with clear lines, who knows what he does and why, while Mark is still at the very beginning of his road, someone who is trying to learn what is right and what is wrong through lived experience. And perhaps most importantly, and in my opinion, the most critical point, Mark's journey doesn't necessarily have to turn him into a traditional superhero. Maybe he'll find a different way to do good, one that steps outside the classic superhero mold, guided by his own values, his own pain, and his own choices. And that possibility is exactly what makes him genuinely interesting. Because we all more or less know what a classic superhero is supposed to look like. That's precisely why when we see a character stepping outside that mold, we become far more curious. Perhaps what makes Mark so interesting is exactly this, his unconventional potential. The general reason these two are compared so often is because young characters are rare in superhero universes. This makes them feel closer and more relatable to the audience. It becomes easier to understand their daily lives and struggles, but what they actually go through is entirely different. Spider-Man grew up as someone ready for the fight, a hero who operates within certain boundaries. Invincible, on the other hand, was a character who was suddenly forced to become a hero, confused, overwhelmed, with the weight of the entire world dropped on his shoulders all at once. What I was doing here wasn't making a general classification. It was more about evaluating the differences between Spider-Man and Invincible through their own dynamics. So I'm not directly labeling Mark as a dark hero, but I am saying that if there is one between the two who tends to make harsher decisions, that would definitely be Mark. I hope I managed to get my point across clearly. Of course, it's possible to analyze these characters far more deeply, but in this video, I wanted to focus directly on their foundations, the core lines that separate them from each other. In my opinion, Invincible naturally got compared to Spider-Man the moment he became a suddenly popular young hero, and that's largely because of certain similarities. So don't forget to share your thoughts and subscribe.